We're going to try to get a better handle on something that seems pretty simple, but as it turns out, is actually crazy complex.
And what's that?
Releasing a dart.
Mhm.
Letting go at just the right moment to send it flying toward that triple 20.
Ah, yes. The elusive perfect release. It definitely seems simple at first glance, doesn't it?
It does. But you sent over this pretty dense report on the biomechanics of it all.
Right. A lot of research has gone into this.
Yeah, and our mission, I guess, today is to, pull out those key insights that can help people throw better, whether they're, just playing for fun or, trying to take their game to that next level.
Exactly. Because even though the entire throwing motion matters, that release point is ultimately what determines your accuracy.
Makes sense. Any little wobble or inconsistency back there can make things go way off up at the board.
Exactly. It's like the final amplifier of any errors you might have made earlier in your throw.
Okay, so where do we even start with this? I mean, this report is pretty packed.
Well, I think a good place to begin is by looking at how the pros do it. What are they doing differently at that moment of release?
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so one of the first things that jumped out at me here is the timing. Apparently, elite players tend to release the dart just before their hand reaches the highest point of that upward swing.
Yeah. And that's where it gets interesting because you would think it'd be all about that perfect peak, right?
Right, right. But it seems like it's more nuanced than that. The report mentions something about millisecond differences in release timing translating to millimeters on the board.
It's incredibly precise.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that instead of aiming for hitting that exact millisecond perfectly every time, a lot of top players prioritize a smooth hand motion through the release.
So it's almost like instead of trying to be a robot about it, it's more about having that natural flow.
Yeah. Think of it like, a golfer's swing. It's that smoothness that leads to consistency. And even if their timing is off by a hair, they're still in a good position to hit a solid shot.
That actually makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
there are like two main approaches then for the pros. One is mastering this ultra precise timing, and the other is creating this release that's kind of built to be forgiving.
Precisely. And both can lead to incredible accuracy. But it highlights how important it is to understand your own style and what works best for you.
Right. Okay, so let's move beyond just the hand for a second. The report also talked about this thing called the kinetic chain, and I'm imagining like a whip.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly like a whip. The power starts in your legs and core, travels up through your arm, and then that final snap comes from your wrist and fingers.
Okay, so it's not just about arm strength. Your whole body is involved in generating that power.
Absolutely. And having good balance in your forearm muscles and flexibility in your wrist, especially bending it back, is key for a clean release.
Oh, that makes sense. And something else I noticed, I think it was in the slow motion videos of the pros, is how little they move their bodies overall compared to, someone like me.
You're right. Elite players are incredibly stable. They minimize extraneous movement to create a more consistent and efficient throw.
Okay, before we move on to break down the release itself, there was one more thing about the pros that I wanted to ask about. The report mentioned how they release the dart with their fingers. There are a couple different styles.
Yeah. Some players release the dart with their front finger coming off a bit earlier, while others have more of a straight release. It's fascinating how much variation there is, even at the highest levels.
So there's no one right way to do it.
Not necessarily. The key is finding what feels natural and smooth for you. That consistent, repeatable flow is what seems to matter most.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. So let's actually dive into the release itself now, and let's start with the timing. Like, what is that sweet spot, that window where you want to be letting go of the dart?
Ideally, you're aiming to release it near that point where your hand reaches peak speed, just as it starts to transition from moving upwards to downwards. It's that moment where your forearm motion is synced with the natural arc the dart will take.
So if you release too early, what happens?
You're likely to see the dart go high, and it often feels like you rushed the throw, cut it short.
And if you let go too late?
The dart will likely go low,
Mm.
and it often feels like you're pushing the dart downwards.
Okay, so early release, high. Late release, low. Got it. But how do you actually get a feel for that perfect timing?
It really comes down to practice. You need to develop that muscle memory, that almost subconscious understanding of when the right moment is. And luckily, our brains are amazing at that. The more you throw, the better you'll get at feeling that sweet spot. It's about developing a sense of that release window, a small range of time where the release will be effective, not just a single precise millisecond.
Okay, so timing is key. And it sounds like it's more about feel than anything else. But what about the fingers?
Ah, yes, the fingers. This is where a lot of people go wrong. The biggest mistake is gripping the dart too tightly. You want to hold it lightly, almost like you're holding a pen.
Interesting. So a relaxed grip is crucial.
Absolutely. Tension in your fingers will lead to all sorts of inconsistencies. You want them to open and extend naturally as you release the dart.
Right. And how those fingers come off the dart can actually affect the way it flies.
It can. There's a subtle influence there.
Mm.
And make sure you're fully extending your fingers to avoid any accidental drag on the dart. That can really mess things up.
Got it. So relaxed grip, full extension. Okay, what about the wrist? There's that whole snap thing that people talk about. Is that important?
It's not as simple as just flicking your wrist.
Mm-hmm.
The movement is more nuanced than that. What you're actually doing is starting with your wrist bent upwards and then using that to power a quick forward bending motion at the moment of release. It's this dynamic interplay of different wrist movements that creates that snap. It's not just up and down or side to side, but a combination of both.
Okay, I see. But isn't there a risk of overdoing it with the wrist, like putting too much force into it?
Definitely. You don't want to be muscling the dart. The key is finding that balance between a controlled, powerful movement and a relaxed, fluid release. And that's where wrist strength and flexibility specific to the throwing motion come into play.
Okay, so we've got the dart leaving the hand. What happens next? I mean, what are the key things to keep in mind as it's actually flying towards the board?
Well, a smooth follow-through towards your target is absolutely essential. Imagine your fingertips are pointing directly where you want that dart to land.
So you're not just stopping your hand abruptly after you let go.
Exactly. It should be one fluid motion, and ideally, your hand and arm should end up in a straight line pointing right at the board. This ensures that you're transferring energy efficiently and not introducing any last-minute wobbles.
Right, right. So we've talked about what a good release looks like. What are some of the classic mistakes that people make that mess things up? I know we touched on a couple already.
Sure. So we talked about releasing too early, which usually sends the dart high, and releasing too late, which sends it low. But another common issue is grip tension. When people get nervous or try to force the throw, they tend to grip the dart too hard. And that can lead to all sorts of problems. Inconsistent placement, wobble, and even that feeling of the dart sticking to your hand as you try to release it.
And it probably feels pretty uncomfortable too.
It does. It's that feeling of tightness and restriction in your hand. And then there's the issue of finger drag. That's when one or more of your fingers linger on the dart for just a split second too long, causing it to kind of fishtail or enter the board at an odd angle.
I've definitely seen that happen. It's like the dart just doesn't quite fly straight.
Right. And often you need slow motion to even see it happening.
Hmm.
But you might feel a slight catching sensation as one of your fingers brushes the dart on its way out.
Okay, so we know the mistakes to avoid. What are some things people can do to actually improve their release? Are there specific drills or exercises they can try?
Absolutely. And the good news is that you don't need a lot of fancy equipment or anything like that. Some of the best drills are actually the simplest.
Like what?
Well, dry releases are a great place to start. Just practice going through the motions of your release without actually holding a dart. This helps you focus on the mechanics of the movement and ingrain that muscle memory.
So just air throwing.
Exactly. And then you can progress to air flicks, where you're actually trying to create that snapping motion and get a feel for the timing and energy transfer.
Okay, so dry releases and air flicks. What else?
Another great exercise is throwing at a wall from close range. This gives you immediate visual feedback on your release and how the dart is behaving as it leaves your hand. You can even use a piece of tape on the wall as a target.
So you can see if you're consistently hitting the same spot or if the dart is wobbling.
Exactly. And then there's a drill that can really help with finger awareness and proprioception. That's your sense of where your body is in space.
Hmm?
And for this one, you just put a small piece of tape on each of your throwing fingers. This helps you feel how your fingers are interacting with the dart and make sure you're getting a clean release.
Interesting. It's like adding an extra layer of feedback.
Right. And of course, if you have access to it, recording yourself throwing in slow motion can be incredibly helpful. It allows you to see things that you might not be able to pick up on in real time and really analyze those finer details of your release.
That makes sense. All right, so to kind of sum up everything we've talked about today, the dart release is this intricate dance of timing, mechanics, and feel. And understanding how all these elements work together, like we've been doing with your report, is that first step toward becoming a more consistent thrower.
It's remarkable, isn't it? How all those tiny factors can have such a huge impact on where the dart ends up.
It is, and it makes me think for anyone listening that maybe the key to unlocking a new level of accuracy in their own game is just a tiny adjustment away. Like maybe it's as simple as subtly changing how firmly they hold the dart or that precise moment when they snap their wrist.
There's always something to tweak and experiment with. And sometimes the smallest changes can make the biggest difference.
It's amazing how much depth there is to something as seemingly simple as throwing a dart. We hope this deep dive has given everyone a new appreciation for all the intricacies involved. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great discussion.